All right, and we're live. What's up, James?
Hello. Yeah, thanks for hosting this, Derek. This is exciting.
It is. I've haven't been able to work with you in this format before, so I'm incredibly excited because we have some context, I would say, right, in how we know each other.
Yes, indeed. Right. We've been uh, crossing paths since 2000, what is that, 2015, 2016, something like that.
Yeah.
Back in the East Bay Advanced Manufacturing Partnership days. I think we met
Yeah.
at what's the name of that startup that I think moved down to Fremont, but they were in San Leandro for a while, and Type A Machines.
Oh, they
Yeah,
they went away. They actually died as a company.
completely.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I
Yeah.
wasn't altogether sure whatever happened to them.
Yeah, but it was a good run. It was a good run. They were they mean a lot to me personally because they were technically the first startup cool company that I helped to kind of attract to San Leandro when San
Hmm.
Leandro was transforming itself into a city of innovation or getting their engines running. And so meeting Espen at Tech Shop in San Francisco, a membership, like a gym for makers, when that was alive as well. I ran into Espen and just told him about Westgate because I was just getting my bearings rolling and I was kind of a fresh young guy, trying to make things happen. So
Right.
that was a big win for me in the early days was getting them on board with San Leandro. But yeah, I think we met in their space, right?
That's right. That's right.
I think you were also with Allison at that time and
Hmm.
hanging out talking about East Bay transportation logistics. I worked with her on another track in
Okay.
addition.
Very good.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
it's been a little bit now.
yeah, and you went to go form well actually let's get in that a little bit. Ada's here. Hi Ada. Um
Hi.
love to have you introduce yourself and tell James here a little bit about your context of you and Pilot City and maybe a little bit about your project too. I think he'd be interested in learning more about that. So go for it. And maybe you can share a little bit about your curiosities about this one as well.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I'm currently a senior at Clayton Valley Charter High School in Concord, and I was a participant in Pilot City last year for on a project for Mayor Pauline Cutter and Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and the project was focused on digital equity, where my partner and we provided a grocery delivery service for senior citizens that eliminated the complicated technology that they might face. Yeah.
Fantastic. I love it. Okay.
And you've since then kind of gotten your bearings, like it started spinning off and becoming a little more, right?
Yeah, we started off just working with a couple of senior facilities in my city, and now we've branched out to a couple more cities in the area, and we're going to the Walnut Creek, Lafayette area right now.
Hmm. Fantastic. So, what entails branching out? That must be a whole nother set of issues and skills and problems to solve, aside from, getting down into the weeds on the technical side of things. Just arranging for expansion must be a thing.
Yeah, definitely. The biggest thing is finding volunteers who are willing to offer their time. And right now, because my partner and I are both students, we're mainly reaching out to other students in other cities and see if they're willing to run this whole system for their seniors.
What vehicle, if you will, did you use for your outreach?
Well, for us, I guess social media like Instagram and Twitter, I guess, but
Okay.
mostly it's right now because it's so close in our area. We have connections to the community service groups around
Okay.
our schools and other schools. So um,
So a little bit of digital, a little bit of analog. Sounds good.
yeah, yeah.
Very good.
Yeah,
Cool.
and
Okay.
and I think that that's one of those kind of startup methods, do things that don't scale. Have you guys ever heard of that?
No, but I mean, I do things that don't scale all the time, so I can appreciate that. Go ahead.
And that's exactly what our conversation is today, right? You got to understand the problem enough to hate it, to want to solve it, right?
Yes.
So, and so by doing things that don't scale, from what Y Combinator or a startup incubator kind of talks about, is you get to understand the problem so well, right? To the point where it's now your personal problem. And through that, you can then iterate on what the solution may be, right? And actually, talking about the nonprofit kind of startup delivery of groceries to seniors during the pandemic model, right? What Ada and her and her business partner has kind of whipped up. DoorDash actually started by putting out a flyer, like, hey, pizza, we got pizza delivery, type of thing, and then a number. And the phone number just went to this, the person, one of the like the people who started it, phone, and then they just picked up, and the flyer just said, like, we'll deliver stuff to you, and they picked up, and then they bought it and they delivered it, and then they took cash, right, on site of the delivery. And that's how DoorDash started, was just listening to the problem.
Yeah, right.
And then they're the one driving it too, right? They're the one making it happen. So that's an exciting approach, because, well, I mean, we'll get to our conversation about, your issue, not necessarily a startup, but you work with a lot of startups, right? So, so James, so to give us some more background on how you got to this work. You have an interesting path, as you've taken a journey into kind of working on a nonprofit end, I would assume, and building early workforce. You have this interesting care for manufacturing and the workforce, but what did you do before that? And how'd you even get to that point?
Yeah, right. Well, let's see. Way back when the Earth was still cooling and the lava was forming into the continents, I got my PhD. And got it in biochemistry, molecular biology. This was the late 90s. And so I assumed, like everybody who gets a doctorate in something, is that I would go on to do that thing. And I did for a good while. I got into startups and was in product development, and that evolved into working for more mature companies where I was involved in manufacturing technical support. So I got to see how things are actually made at scale, and how to support that, how to utilize my skill set and grow my skill set specifically for operations. And so that sort of took me toward some different companies and different paths, and layoffs and volatility and everything in biotech is what it is. But it landed me at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and this was 2011. So 2011 had me working kind of again in startup mode at with a program that was freshly minted, called the Advanced Biofuels and Bioproducts Process Development Unit, or ABPDU, which is a branding nightmare, I admit. Wasn't my choice.
It sounds very smart, and maybe and impressive. So
yeah, exactly, right. So there is that. And so I was involved with that project for about 3 years, and I decided to do some consulting. My wife and I wanted to do some extended vacationing, kind of road trip sorts of things, and it just seemed like a good time to do that. So, to kind of finance that and do it in our own way, I chose to get out into the consulting world. And that sort of took me toward helping the local workforce development boards with their effort in trying to kind of reboot their initiatives in manufacturing in the region. And so that led to me co-founding the Bay Association of Manufacturers Bay Area, or AM Bay Area. And so That, yeah, indeed was a nonprofit, is a nonprofit. And so far so good. It's going along even despite the COVID challenges. And it's supporting local manufacturers in all variety of ways, not the least of which is in the workforce development realm. So, you know, in that instance, it was less about my, you know, passion for workforce development, and more about just acknowledging that that was a huge problem to be solved. So it was being agnostic about the problem, and then going about trying to figure out how to solve it. And so and I was doing that for a few years, I guess about 5 or so years, and had this opportunity to come back to Berkeley Lab, but this time kind of applying some of the business acumen, some of the relationship development skill set that I had picked up along the way. And so now I'm in this more of a collaborator development or business development type of role for a couple of different programs at Berkeley Lab. One is the ABPDU, so going back to my old stomping grounds, but the other is the Agile Biofoundry, which is more like basic science of synthetic biology. So let's say you want to make a
See that one, just see that one more time, but a little slower. If you don't mind.
Sure.
It's 8 a.m.
Sure.
So
yes. So the second program is the Agile Biofoundry, and it's all about utilizing cutting edge tools in synthetic biology. And when I say synthetic biology, think of like beer fermentation on steroids. So instead of making beer, you're making isobutyric acid, or you're making a plastic precursor, you know, that can be used as a biodegradable, biosourced polymer, or you're making a high energy molecule that can be used as a jet fuel. And all these things are real and going on. And so the sky's the limit. We use yeast, like you know, the brewer's yeast. We use bacteria. We use filamentous fungi. So there's all these different hosts that can do different things and are either sensitive to or resistant to the kinds of products that would otherwise be toxic if you tried to grow it in bacteria, but it works well in fungi, as a for instance. So there's all these different tools and techniques and genetics that one can use to force a microbe to make X, Y, or Z. Okay. And so that's what the Agile Biofoundry does. It does that, working with collaborators all over the country and world to generate these new products from essentially, you know, what you might think of as a beer brewing process. Again, on steroids. So that's what I do. And basically my role is to kind of summon groups into those facilities, to utilize those facilities as kind of a public service. So I work at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. It's part of the broad national laboratory umbrella. I think there are 17 or 18 national laboratories all over the country. And so all these groups all over the country are doing things to support our national interests in energy and defense and agriculture and on and on.
okay, so there's a couple things I want to go back to before I get back to this specifically. So you took off to do some consultant because you like solving problems. Mm-hmm. That's what it came down to, right?
Essentially, yes. I wanted to have some flexibility, so it was sort of a twofold thing. But really, yeah, having the ability to look at a wide variety of problems for the client was really what I was interested in doing. It turned out that the primary client ended up becoming the county workforce boards, and I worked for that particular client mostly throughout those 5 years that I was consulting.
And before that, you're with LBNL, right?
Right.
And with the ABPDU. and you still work with them. And how big of a percentage is ABPD versus the Agile Biofoundry in your work and so forth?
It's about half and half. Yeah.
Okay. So say the acronym again, and then can you describe what that one is as well? Yeah.
Sure. The Advanced Biofuels and Bioproducts Process Development Unit develops processes. And we do so for the production of so-called advanced biofuels as well as bioproducts. So like I say, let's say somebody has that polymer precursor bacterium that they've figured out, but they've only got it working like in a test tube. What they need to do is have it working at 10,000 liter scale kind of thing. So think of gigantic, like towers of sized fermenters. Well, the ABPDU gets them about 50% of the way there. We have a 300 liter fermenter. And that size is often indicative of how things will behave at much larger scales. So it's often referred to as a pilot plant. So folks will take a technology and see how well it scales and say, okay, this thing that was working really nicely in a test tube, turns out it's working really well at 10 liters, but there's something weird going on at 300 liters. And so let's figure out what about the geometry of the vessel, or maybe there's something wrong with the genetics aren't stable and it kicks out the gene that is producing the thing, and that happens all the time. So there's all these different kinds of ways in which things can go squirrely or determine whether or not they can actually work. And what's important about that is groups like VCs and other kinds of funding organizations will say, so how well did it scale at ABPDU or something like that? If they say, oh, it worked great. Okay, well, here's $10 million, kind of thing.
So you are basically a gateway for a lot of startups to make a lot of progress.
Exactly.
It seems.
Yes.
That's very exciting. So you got these two factions, of what you're doing, and how do they work in unison with each other? Because you got the ABPDU, which is essentially taking some from a test tube to a 10,000 or half of that kind of system, right? For testing scalability. Then you got the Agile Biofoundry, which is using cutting edge tools, right? In synthetic biology. So essentially, I'm assuming Agile Biofoundry fits within that, or how does that?
It's sort of the other way. It's sort of the other way around. ABPDU kind of fits within Agile Biofoundry. Now, that said, the lion's share of what Agile Biofoundry is all about is from paper to test tube. You can think of it like that, like from concept to, okay, we got something, we got the genes all figured out and transformed into the microbe, and it looks like it's working, in a so-called shake flask, sort of like the 100 mil type size. And then if the project scope is defined to utilize some scale up work, then they might come to the ABPDU. There's also a facility in Golden, Colorado that they can consider. That's sort of the sister pilot plant for ABPDU. So yeah, that's sort of how it goes.
Okay, so 0 to 1 is the Agile Biofoundry, exactly. 0 to 1. Mm-hmm. And then ABPDU essentially is 1 to 10,000, 1 to 5,000, 1 to whatever.
Well, it's technically it's 1 to 300 if you're looking at it from a mils or a liters scale. Yeah. So
very interesting. Okay, so you're essentially a startup incubator for cutting edge biotechnologies.
Precisely. Yeah.
So that's very. And now I think the context is very helpful, right, for students who are doing this project on optimizing workflows and whatnot, because you're essentially starting a startup incubator, or there is already a startup incubator, and that system needs to be better optimized or better come together as a system. There needs to be better marketing for the people who are doing amazing things internally. There needs to be models for what the business relationship is between LBNL and the startup. So I'm assuming LBNL gets something out of it too, right? I mean,
it really gets
besides public welfare,
well, the most of the budget for both of these programs come from the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy says you shall go out into the public realm and help businesses figure out how to scale up their technologies. And so it's a cost recovery in the sense that the Department of Energy basically footed the bill for getting the place established, and there's some operational overhead costs and so forth that maintain the facility. But these types of resources can't really exist in the private sector. The pilot plants of the world are at a very precarious, razor thin profit margin, and they just generally don't exist because it's very difficult to make something like that work. Pilot plants are usually something, at least historically, that a company would build kind of bespoke for their particular use on their particular site, not available to others. And if they've got the cash flow to do that, well, great. And I've seen that it happens a lot, but most startups simply do not have the wherewithal to do that. And so, go ahead, Derek.
I'm just is what indie. I know we might have talked about this indie bio, like those kind of biotech incubators. That's I guess an example, right, of a pilot plant, but I'm sure it's not well funded. To be successful in helping people.
We work with Indie Bio a lot, just maybe to give you some context. Of course, Indie Bio, provides some funding. They provide some space for doing some initial, testing and so forth of a potential technology. And just as importantly, they provide a lot of business acumen and so forth, so that a group can kind of find their way in the business side of things. And we don't do any of that. It's all technical for us. But what we do is provide a really, really kind of valuable resource for the indie bios of the world to point their cohorts to, so that they can say, okay, go and interact with AVPDU, and maybe we can help either write a grant, or we can give you some funds or whatever. And then those funds could come back to the AVPDU and basically just offset the cost of running the equipment, of staffing the equipment. So ours is a cost recovery model. By virtue of being a public service, we cannot make a profit. It is outside of our realm. Yeah,
that makes yeah. And the reason why I asked about IndieBio, I have no idea where they're at right now, but we're talking to Ryan Bethencourt, who used to, I think, was the managing director, I forgot, partner over at IndieBio. So, and we may work with his Wild Earth, which I think you're a purchaser of.
Yes.
So, which is a biotech dog food startup.
Indeed it is, based out of Berkeley. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. Ryan used to run IndieBio, and I was always been fascinated with it, because it seems like the biotech incubation space, I would say, I mean, it was only within the last 10 years until those systems and those models, for startup incubation of biotech companies really got started. Would you say, like, what's the history of biotech startup incubation in general, outside of LBNO?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know when QB3 got started. I think it was more than 10 years ago. So I think it's more like a decade and a half or something. I'd have to look back at it myself, honestly. I don't quite remember when, because that's sort of the big one that everybody knows. But yeah, there's now Lawrence Berkeley Lab has its own. It's called Cyclotron Road.
Cyclotron Road, right? Yeah.
So this is a growing trend for sure. So yeah.
Okay. So that's one thing I wanted to clarify too, was Cyclotron Road. So I think it used to be called something else. But tell us about how that folds in to this the ABPDU, Agile Power Foundry, how does that synchronize in?
It's sort of a similar thing. So, if a group is selected or is invited to come to Cyclotron Road, and if their technology is of the biotech persuasion, and they're looking for some technology development, say at Agile Biofoundry, or some bioprocess development at ABPDU, then a portion of those funds might be available to execute that work at these facilities. And so, we're sort of part of the support network or structure, that a national laboratory can offer, both to the Cyclotron Road cohorts as well as, companies that aren't necessarily associated with an incubator.
So they seems like they're more on the programmatic side, as opposed to ABPDU and the Agile Biofoundry, which is access to actual tools and technologies and resources of scientists to support the development and advancement of their product itself.
That's right. And it's, I guess you would say that it's a bit of a misnomer to call ABPDU or Agile Biofoundry an incubator, but I think you would be right to say that we offer a lot of value in supporting those types of incubator models. So you could do it without ABPDU and Agile Biofoundry, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier to have these types of resources.
I would assume, that there needs to be almost a carved out side on the business front, which seems like what, or the network connection part and the community part, right? Which may be what Cyclotron Road is, I believe, and then the technical, kind of support side, right? To help advance the product itself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so that all clarifies a lot. So you really your background is really in biotech before you went into advanced manufacturing and building workforce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a lot to learn when it came to workforce development and the kind of the different kind of culture that was kind of part and parcel of the workforce development world. Quite a bit different than what you would experience working at a biotech company. That is for sure, and definitely very different from working at a national laboratory, which has its own kind of cultural feel to it. So there were, and then of course the just the different series of questions and how to attack those questions. At the end of the day, I'm still pretty much a lab rat. That's what I got into science for, was to do so-called bucket biochemistry, where I was working with a variety of tools and, learning with my hands, as I'd like to say. That's still deep in there. You can take the person out of the lab, but you can't take the lab out of the person. So so that's sort of where I'm at. But yes, my real background is biotech, and secondarily is manufacturing.
And biotech is manufacturing, right? So it's really interesting that you got in, went from the bio side to the tangible workforce development of that side, and then you're kind of back in this. It seems like you have way higher capacity, right, to solve problems than what you're in at that particular moment. Given, biotech is pretty. There's a lot of details there, compared to producing physical things, like hardware or something like that. Or
well, I mean, don't of course, as well as anybody that there's a ton of context when it comes to machining, some kind of a part from an ingot of aluminum. That's challenging too. So it's
supply chain, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Just how the system works together. It's more almost, when you think about it, it's almost more it's systems based, is what manufacturing is.
Yeah, and so when it comes to making something from biology, it's a different series of questions. But at the end of the day, you know, it's still, what's the product quality? What was the cost of production? Did one hit the, you know, kinds of carbon footprint reduction targets that is sort of goes hand in hand with biomanufacturing? You know, so all these things still, you know, there is a where does the rubber meet the road kind of thing that has a lot of overlap with traditional manufacturing.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so we're here now, and you're doing this you're supporting the development of incredible organizations that are just either starting up or they're advancing their startup to create solutions in the world that would guide towards optimizing use of resources and energy and sustainability practices and helping to basically save the world, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, and that's what's exciting about it. I get to wake up every day and feel like I'm contributing to a solution. So
that's great. And so, and you're bringing in these startups in mass to some extent, and they're going through this kind of process of development of their products.
Mm-hmm.
And your mission and job in your role in your division and department and whatnot is to essentially take them down this road, right?
Mm-hmm.
To get to A to Z. And there's a lot of pieces along the way for them to for them and you and your team to partner up together to get to the end, right?
Exactly.
And so there's the onboarding, or there's probably some, you know, networking and relationship building in the front end to recruit and find indie bios of the world to point cohorts towards you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would assume. Then
Yes.
there's actually making those relationships and getting those people you know, excited to partner together. And then there's some meetings, then there's some hey, this is what we want, this is what we need. And then, oh, hey, we want to partner together, here's some documents, maybe this is a package of information, and then they want to do it. Then you know, there's like this whole am I right? Okay,
that's it.
So I mean, walk us through what that flow is.
Sure.
And all the components and pieces so that we can move towards our project discussion. And let me just announce it now, just so there's context for people who are watching now, because people who are watching this right now are in your program, right? And so this is providing them context to build the project for them. So we're asking students to prototype code and automate business workflows by developing integrations with Smartsheets or Zapier, or integration of value to your process to improve the process of biotech partners onboarding into LBNM, right? Mm-hmm. So just want to give that context. So yeah, walk us through what that process is and what some of the challenges are of that process.
Okay. And I drew a flow diagram for a different audience, but I think that this will be pretty informative. So I'm going to share my screen.
Let me make you co-host.
Okay.
And boom, there you go.
All right. And let's see. Make sure I picked the right thing.
And Ada mentioned she's still processing all this, so feel free to jump in at any point, Ada. I'm sure this is like a lecture within itself.
Yeah, and you know, feel free to kind of not, you know, you're going to have to decide how best to parse out this information in your mind as you go, because there's a lot here, but I'll try to talk it through in a way that is digestible.
Sure.
So yeah, this is basically the flow diagram of everything that it takes from the first communication to project kickoff. And so that involves, and this is specifically for the ABPDU. It's not terribly different for the Agile BioFoundry, but it is different. And for reasons that, again, I need not belabor at this point. But this will be informative generally. So so there's that first communication piece that Derek you just mentioned, and that involves, yes, going to meetings, and right now virtual meetings, of course, interacting with members of the latest Indie Bio cohort, or the cyclotron roads of the world, or even venture capitalists themselves who say, hey, I've got this idea thing, but it needs to be de-risked. Can you talk to them? So there's any number of ways in which that first communication takes place, or they just find us on the web. That happens all the time too. And so there's a bit of presentation and discussion that takes place. We have a screencast that I can share. I've got a couple of them that will be helpful. I think I shared one through the video blog. That one was pretty terrible. It was really only meant to as a placeholder, but at least it tells you something. But anyway, there's these presentations that take place. Then it's a matter of, okay, we're interested, let's continue the conversation. So then there's a kind of this work of developing what will be the platform of information gathering. And that includes Smartsheet. Again, using it in a fairly vanilla flavored way, where basically I'm just using it as a way of measuring the status of tasks throughout the onboarding process. And these are kind of all the tasks, if you will. And then the kind of an accompanying folder that has information, a place to like store the non-disclosure agreement when it gets signed, and so on and so on and so on. So there's a number of different pieces of information that gets captured in a folder. And so that's my sort of standard platform for what will be the mechanical aspect of onboarding the project. And this is a big part of what I want to improve upon in terms of the automation part of it, because that will drive automation through the rest of this. So anyway, once that takes place, then we begin to ask the question, okay, so and really we will have asked and guessed at who will be the principal investigator for this would-be project. And we usually ask that somewhere up in here, because we need to include that person or people in the conversations early on, so that we can
define what a PI is, a principal investigator, because this is a really good intro to doctorate degrees.
Yeah. So a principal investigator is basically a lead scientist who will lead other researchers. Or typically, a principal investigator is somebody who has a group of scientists working underneath them, and so we have at ABPDU we have 1, 2, 3, 4, including myself, because sometimes I actually do get to play scientist still. And so that individual would then be a key part of the conversation going forward to identify the scope of a project. What are the things you want to do in this project, basically. And then that scope is, can be broken down, at least for the ABPDU, into basically 4 chunks, whatever, that you don't need to worry about that. So once the PI or PI subgroup has been identified, then it's about, okay, Bill or Sherry, which of you wants this project? Because we've got 20 projects already going. Who has the bandwidth to take this on? So once we identify who is actually going to run the project, then we can begin to ask or begin to answer some other questions. And so, as you can see, it's basically broken out into identifying the principal investigator and early stages of identifying the scope of a project. Then getting the agreements and assessments off and running. That includes a non-disclosure agreement, a material transfer agreement, the safety review, administrative review. Is this a foreign-owned company, for instance, which is really important to ask, because it would not bode well if we took money from a company that is funded by Iran or North Korea or something like that. So these kinds of things have to be really well understood. So then that whole thing, all the agreements and all the statement of work, early stages, are then driven toward establishing the actual scope and finalizing the agreements. That can go a few different ways depending on the nature of the project, and it comes in a few different flavors. I don't want to belabor that because that's a whole nother thing. But basically, once we identify how it's going to move through the rest of the flow, then we are all about just really driving toward a final statement of work, or SOW, and then identifying the budget for that project. Once we have that, we can do things like set up the work agreement, which is another type of agreement. And then all these things sort of feed into the final kickoff of the project. And this whole process takes about 3 months. So now multiply that by, I think we've got, I don't know, well, 20 projects kind of going right now at ABPDU, and another 20 that are going at Agile BioFoundry. And then we're going to onboard another, I don't know, I guess like 5 or so at the Agile BioFoundry soon. Plus we've got, I don't know, maybe another 30 or 40 different relationships that are in some form or some part of this whole process at ABPDU. And oftentimes they'll die once they see the budget, you know. So there's any number of reasons, or like maybe they don't like the non-disclosure agreement language and they say, sorry, we can't abide by that. So there's any number of reasons why groups fail through this, but we have to track why they fail, so that we can understand how to improve our own processes, or understand at least where the big risks lie. So for us, we're seeing about a 10% conversion rate, which actually isn't that bad, you know, if, you know, in the broader sort of sense of things, just by virtue of the way business relationships works. And that's essentially what this is. So the conversion rate is what it is, but understanding why it is and where things go squirrely is important. So yeah, that's the whole shooting match. Now, again, what I'm trying to do is automate this, and in doing so, set the stage for automating some of these handoffs, because different groups own different pieces of this process. And right now there's a lot of emailing. There's a lot of, oh, did, you know, whatever, so-and-so get back to us about the agreement, and, you know, what happened there. And so there's just a tremendous amount of back and forth that I'm hoping, kind of my grand vision is that so much of that back and forth can be kind of tamped down. You know, different groups have their own databasing systems and their own internal workflows, like the Intellectual Property Office has theirs and the Strategic Partnerships Office has theirs. But everybody else kind of is left to their own devices. And up till the time that I started working here, we had no real process. It was very ad hoc, and talk about not scalable. So, you know,
wow.
I think I've managed to squeeze that lack of scalability down to a specific kind of series of activities, but those two need to be bettered.
Wow. Keep this up for a little bit, because these diagrams make me excited. I don't know why. I think this is the architecture background in me, you know, that likes looking at these workflows and diagrams. It makes it very clear what you're asking for, right? And it's even more exciting that you've helped to optimize the system to even know that this is the flow, and that there's probably some dropping points that, you know, are some of the issues. And I wanted to clarify, actually, you said it's a 10% conversion rate, which is really helpful to know. Where does the 98% break down in terms of drop off? You know, when you're going down this chart, these workflows, you know, and scrolling around, where do they drop off? And you mentioned funding, you know, when you see the budget, that's a big drop off. So walk us down from start to finish. Where are some of the drop offs, just so people know the challenges, the students know the challenges?
Sure. I would say one drop off is, can we do it? You know, can we do whatever it is they need us to do? And so there's going to be a certain percentage of people that are like, oh, actually, we need a different thing. So it just there's not a good fit. And that might be, I don't know, maybe 20% or something, because they just literally were coming at it from a tabula rasa type of position where they just didn't know what ABPDU does. And so just isn't a good fit. You know, but let's say that we're beyond that, and now we're you know, everything's flowing and everybody knows that this is the right facility for doing it. There have been some groups that really just don't like the language in the non-disclosure agreement, and so there might be just some legalese that just doesn't seem to fly with their attorneys, and we've had groups that have taken over a year to sign their non-disclosure agreement. So 12 weeks turns into 50 weeks plus, So so there's that. Then it's the issue of the budget. And so, for us, like I say, it's purely a cost recovery, but national laboratories have a high overhead. So it's not like it's some deal of the century. But it's also, again, you're not going to find this kind of expertise and this kind of equipment anywhere, for a cheap price. So I would say that from the perspective of somebody needing to achieve answer X, Y, or Z, it's, for lack of a better term, it's certainly kind of within the going rate. Now, I say going rate, but again, there is no rate for what we do, because what we do doesn't compete with the private sector, just by virtue of.
Basically, you're saying that it's you guys are pretty cool, right? You just got a lot of cool stuff in there.
Yeah, and so when we've been reviewed by other groups that have a good understanding of how contract manufacturing works and contract research works, they see that this is, the price tag, as it were, is aligned with what one should expect. It's just that oftentimes groups simply have no idea how much contract research or contract manufacturing really costs. And because they themselves are startups, they know their little piece of science or their technology, but they don't really understand the broader kind of perspective of what it takes to scale a material and truly understand it. And so, yeah, there's that sticker shock that happens, and groups fall off precipitously at that. They just didn't realize that they would need that much capital to take their project to the next level. And so they may come back, once they have more wherewithal to do that. And they often do. We've worked with over 60 companies in the 10 years that ABPDU has been in existence. And that ranges from huge companies like Procter & Gamble, or at least the European arm. We did a big project for so-called FATER, which is the Procter & Gamble arm in Europe. And we've worked with tiny startups that almost literally were incubated at ABPDU. Like before they had their own, office, they would come in and just, sort of keep a low profile and act like they weren't there, and they would hang out. So yeah, we've worked with, the broad spectrum of company types. So it's to say that, many companies do find a way to work with us.
For those companies that are super startups or startups in general, I mean, do VCs fund the price tag of this? I mean,
often, or it may be a National Science Foundation grant, or other types of funding agencies that are basically, providing money within the scope of a proposal that they had, and part of that scope is to see if it scales, kind of thing.
And what's the range? You don't have to get into any specifics, any particular company, but what price tag are we talking about here? What's the sticker shock? I think kids and students don't typically know, like, what money we're talking. What's the range here?
Yeah, I would say a low budget project would be something on the order of $40,000 to $50,000. Okay. A high budget project would be something on the order of $500,000. So
okay, that's actually, I guess, doable, as they would say, right? For some startups with, I mean, I guess biotech startups get funded at a pretty higher. They get funded at a higher cost because they're considered a material, right? So I'm sure they get a little bit more funding in some cases. What does a typical startup in a biotech get funded on a seed round or Series A round to be able to fund and afford stuff like this?
Yeah, that gets sort of out of my knowledge depth. I'm not altogether sure how those seed rounds go, I'm sure that that's a question that you can take a good stab at.
Yeah, because I would assume that, it'd be a little more if they have things like this that they have to build capacity for and fund in order to advance their project, right?
Mhm.
And but $40,000-$50,000 not bad, basically. But when you get to the $500,000, that's a little different. So I would assume they would get at least like 2, 3, 4 million, for seed, just to kind of get their bearings together and access resources like this effectively.
Yeah, I would tend to think so too. And so I guess it comes down to how much had they projected, how much had they set aside for this kind of research? Did they just totally blow the estimate when they were, figuring out what that 1 or 2 million is going to cover? So be that as it may, that is definitely one aspect of things that can take it off the rails. And then the other is the work agreement itself. And so working for the federal government, which, we're essentially managed by the University of California system on behalf of the U.S. Department of Energy. That's sort of the convoluted relationship of the national lab. And this is true for national labs generally. There's usually a manager of some sort that manages the facility on behalf of the DOE. So the other place where things can go a little weird is the work agreement itself, because there are data rights, as they say. There are who owns the intellectual property that may result. So it becomes a question of who gets to own that, who licenses it, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, attorneys can have a really tough time with some of the language that is embedded in the work agreements. And so we lose a fair number of folks that way too. So I would say they've got to show that they're what their ownership structure is. And if they are foreign owned, that can be a problem. It doesn't have to be, but it definitely can elongate the process too, which the long process itself may also scare off some people. It just takes a while to get through all of this. And so that's part of maybe what I'm hoping to ultimately do, is collapse some of the timeline of this through some of this automation.
Yeah. So in regards to the beginning part, which is very exciting, right? This kind of setup of resources with smart sheets and even going in towards kind of the agreements and assessments kind of diagrams to optimize that as a potential in the future. So tell us more about the smart sheet and what kind of data is in that on a generalized way, and how those intersect, right, with the agreements and assessments, the principal investigator identification, the established scope and finance agreements. How does the smart sheet integration, how does data get into the smart sheet and why? And then how does the data inside a smart sheet get utilized throughout the process of this workflow?
Right. So the data gets into the smart sheet through manual entry. And so what I do is essentially take a block of common tasks that are true for any project and basically reflect these steps, okay? And that block of tasks, I just literally copy and paste into my long list of projects that are ongoing. I rename to take the generic aspect of of those block of tasks away, so that now it's associated with company X, whatever. And then I start to add specifics that are particular for that project, like when did it launch? What's the link to the folder for that project? And so I'll hyperlink a task to that folder, so that as I go about, working with the information in that folder, I can always just click it and it'll open a new tab, and then I'm there in the Google folder. And so I'll have a variety of hyperlinks, and some of those hyperlinks will actually link me into other systems. Like the Intellectual Property Office has its own databasing system, and I can hyperlink so that it will take me to that particular NDA for that particular company. And then I can look to see where in their internal processes they are. So, so most of the information that I'm looking at is specific to either a project or general to all the projects. So how many projects have finished their non-disclosure agreement? How many projects are in the material transfer agreement stage? Where are we with the safety and biosafety assessment? You know, for whatever projects there are. And so, and I would love to be able to show you some of the dashboarding and stuff, but it's pretty. Well, no, I can't, unfortunately, because it's so much of the information is proprietary.
Right.
So what I did do though is offer up that albeit kind of clunky screencast that does show with some things blurred out so that names aren't revealed, but it does show how the information is cataloged within Smartsheet. And so that rolls up to different reporting mechanisms within Smartsheet, which in turn rolls up to dashboards. And so when I go into our weekly meeting about where we're at with collaboration development, I can refer to those. And so, you know, part of what I'm trying to do is make that as nimble and as informative as possible so that my boss and so forth can go in and take a look and see exactly where we're at with things. And it's like 75% of the way there, but it's still, it still lacks an aha aspect to it. So a lot of what is going on is in parallel, the old style way of tracking the information, which is really quite analog. So I want to try to, you know, make this really sing, you know, in a much in kind of that step function fashion. And I think that a few incremental changes will get us there. But, you know, right now it just isn't where it needs to be for scaling because so much of this is still hands-on. And then it isn't where it needs to be in terms of, you know, really extracting the information back out of the database that is the Smartsheet in a way that is as informative as it could be. So,
yeah, this is all very informative and very contextualizing for students to be able to tackle this. And so it's actually very clear what the scope is, right? So it's really Smartsheets is the center of how you currently access everything. So we want to focus on Smartsheets and integration into Smartsheets. There is a possibility of using Zapier in automating the workflow into Zapier or into Smartsheets, for example, or to even automate individual connections between all these different things, right? But let's focus on Smartsheets for just a moment here. So the number one, you know, task is really to implement some level of an infrastructure, right? Almost like a create new partnership button, right?
Exactly. That's what I want to see is like, here's your 5 pieces of information, hit go, and it populates the Smartsheet. It creates the folder. It creates the kind of boilerplate files that needs to be there. It pre-populates the NDA questionnaire. I mean, there's all these things that could be done if you literally just hit the right button. And what's nice about Smartsheet, and I think I kind of explained this in the videos, in the video blog, is that it's got several different APIs, and one of those is a Python API. So you can do all kinds of crazy stuff if you have some of those coding chops. And, you know, of course, Google is right there too, Google Docs and all of that. I have to believe that there are some really kind of straightforward ways to make this doable, where like a little form and a button would, you know, provide that kind of exactly how you described it, Derek, just a quick, you know, launch project here kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's super doable, and it's an exciting project because I'm sure Smartsheets has really good documentation and the peripheral tools like Google Sheets, even in Zapier and so forth, have good documentation too. So the implementation, this kind of launch button, create document set button that then implements all the, the publishing of all these infrastructures to create the infrastructure. And that's number one. Number two seems to be, as the workflow occurs, taking those individual emails, taking those documents that were signed on DocuSign, taking the different things that were answered on a form, right, along this whole workflow here, and then having that input automatically into Smartsheets to have a more complete data set as people walk down this road. And then you just kind of go to Smartsheets and look at column 359 or whatever many columns you got, and you say, oh, this is how many people are at this stage now. And now we can take these people to this next stage. It helps you guys manage your workflow in a more effective way. So is that the second priority, you would say, or second opportunity?
Yeah, I'd say that that's the second opportunity. And you're right to like vacillate. Is it a priority or an opportunity? Because there's kind of an equivalency in terms of the priority of being able to get the information out in as effective a way as we're trying to, or endeavoring or envisioning to get the information in. And so, yeah, being able to look at some kind of a visual on a dashboard and say, we've got these 4 projects, and oddly enough, this one is hanging up. Why is that? Oh, call up Kristen in the IP office. It turns out they forgot to sign something. So being able to have a window into the status of projects will allow us to catch and QC the process in real time, and so that we have happier collaborators, we have more collaborators, and more projects, and just adding value to the whole community in a more effective way.
So give us a baseline on what Smartsheets is, just so people know what that is in this kind of all encapsulating podcast here, it seems, and any additional tools that you use in priority, starting with Smartsheets.
Can you say that again, Derek?
Just give us a tour of what tools you use, basically, right?
Okay.
Start with Smartsheets and defining what that is. So what is Smartsheets, and why is that an important tool to use? And then what are some additional tools that you guys use to manage this process now?
Sure. So Smartsheet is a spreadsheet that is kind of a bit of a hybrid between a spreadsheet and a database, because essentially a database, or a data table, I should say, is just fields, that is columns, and records, which is rows. And so when you look at a spreadsheet with the columns and the rows, that's just a completely generalized data table. And you can do all kinds of wacky stuff on a spreadsheet that makes it look nothing like an actual data table. But with the beauty of Smartsheet is that it has some flexibility that just a standard Google Sheet or Excel spreadsheet has, but it also has some hard wiring so that all your columns are always fields and all your rows are always records. And so that's sort of the underpinning of Smartsheet. And then what's nice about it is it's all virtual. There's not a desktop product. You go on to your browser and you access it from there. Smartsheet, its main function is for managing projects. So it has, and you can do different things with it and so forth. You can co-opt it for different functions, and I do that. But for the purposes of this conversation, it's really about, here's your list of tasks in your records, and then here's all the things associated with that task, like who owns it, when did it start, when is it due, here's some notes about it, what company is it associated with, on and on. You can, and so you can have all different kinds of columns. As Derek suggested, you can have zillions of columns and zillions of rows. What's nice about it is that there's a lot of different ways in which you can hyperlink to information outside the Smartsheet, and I do that within each task. so that I can kind of have that connectivity to other things like I was mentioning. And then the other aspect of it that's nice is that there is hierarchy built into it, so that you can have a parent row, and underneath that you can have child rows, and then they can have child rows, and so on and so on. So you can have this hierarchical structure to it. And that's important if you have a subtask. Let's say, so for instance, the non-disclosure agreement, getting that to where everybody has signed it means that first you got to get the draft agreement created. Then you got to get that draft agreement in front of the collaborator. The collaborator has to review it, and they may have edits that they request. That has to be tracked. Then they finally sign it. So then you can mark that as complete as a task. Then the intellectual property office has to sign it and then send it back. And then so all of that has to be tracked. So there's, I don't know, a dozen different steps in just the non-disclosure agreement. And so that all lives under the hierarchy of NDA, just like the scope of work has a hierarchy of scope of work. And so there's like 24 steps in that. So all of these things then roll up to the top level of the project as a whole. And so, you know, those hierarchies can be collapsed for more visual scanning of kind of the 30,000 foot view, or they can be expanded down to the individual task. And so those are the kinds of things that Smartsheet does well. There are some things that Smartsheet doesn't do particularly well. I mean, you can for instance, you can attach documents to a Smartsheet, and I think that that's a total waste of time, because getting documents in and out of Smartsheet is cumbersome. Why not use Google Drive for that? Because it does it really, really well, and it has all kinds of sharing capabilities and so on. And so that's what I do. I always sort of just connect back to the Google folder for that particular project. And each project has its own folder, which is hugely important, because you don't want to start mixing proprietary information across projects. And so here again, you know, you can't share proprietary information among projects inadvertently or mistakenly. You can't somehow, you know, mess up that filing system, and you can't divulge it to the general public, because by virtue of that non-disclosure agreement, that would be that would put their own intellectual property at risk. So there's all these different things to kind of make sure that only the right people can see specifically the right files that are particular to them.
So Google Drive is a strong second, essentially.
Yes. So you have the Smartsheet, then you have the Google Drive, and in Google Drive, I'll use a specific Google Doc for capturing meeting notes, and I'll have a specific spreadsheet for capturing other pieces of information about the statement of work, what the budget is, what all the contact information is for that particular company, so that their, for instance, their foreign ownership can be assessed and that kind of thing. So there's all these different bits and pieces of information that doesn't really belong in Smartsheet, because its job is to track tasks, but at the same time need to live somewhere. So, you know, that's part of the reason why having a sort of an ancillary spreadsheet is a good idea. So yeah, the folder, and then a couple different file types.
And then email. Do you use like DocuSign or anything like that, or what do you do for signature signing stuff?
DocuSign, and that really becomes the realm of the intellectual property office. So luckily, I don't really have to mess with that. They just tell me that it got DocuSigned, and so which is nice. But
so basically your job would be to like say it'd be like a button that click like, oh, the legal office said yes, and then we click it, and then that would just trigger that portion of your process to clear and then go to the next phase.
Yeah, it definitely could. There could be sort of sub button type of activities. Definitely figuring out how to make it as light a touch as possible. I always thought, wouldn't it be great if I could email the Smartsheet, and in emailing the Smartsheet, it would go, oh, okay, that task is done. I'll change all the status of that to complete, and it was completed on this day, and da 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 da. and in that way, I don't have to go into Smartsheet very often. It really begins to serve more as a databasing kind of backend,
And that would be, I think, where Zapier comes in to some extent.
It could, yeah.
Potentially.
And
Yeah.
Zapier does have Smartsheet connectivity tools in it. So there, one could envision using Zapier. The beautiful thing about Smartsheet and the Python approach is that Berkeley Lab does not have to cough up for more licensing. And so not to say that a Zapier license would break the bank or something, but just, kind of parenthetically, it'll mean that we have to, seek out some funds, I would imagine, to make that happen. Not a big deal, but if we could do it without Zapier, that might be a little bit easier, but it's not the end of the world if it should prove that Zapier, if we can make a good business case for getting a license for that.
Yeah, let's say this. Let's say Smartsheets is the main culprit here, and then Google Drive, and then Zapier is an opportunity that students can look at to make a good case of making everyone's lives so much easier in this process that and that gets proposed to you to then potentially be justified to be able to bring to people to approve of that, right, as an idea. But
right.
The more direct focus should be, the majority of the time that should be spent is Smartsheet integrations, unless they really feel like they see some insight in how Zapier can integrate everything together into Smartsheets.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. If it should come to pass that Zapier is holding the key, then I don't think I would have a hard time making a case. It's not like I'm having to go before Congress or something, but but yeah, it does. It's a lighter lift from my end if we could do it without. But if somebody could make a good case for, hey, Zapier is gonna do all these things, then yeah, we could make that happen.
Okay, great. You can stop sharing your screen now. Ada, I don't know if you have any particular questions. You just this is definitely a job shadow at this point. And I have to go to the potty for a little bit. So maybe Ada, you can ask some questions, and I'll be back in a minute or so. Does that work?
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. I guess my first question would be, what's the normal size of the team in each project development process?
Yeah, so the team for the project development process would be myself, the principal investigator, the resource analyst who works with the Strategic Partnerships Office, the patent attorney or the intellectual property attorney. There would probably be some input from other members of the principal investigators research group. So that might be a fifth person involved. Sixth person would be the safety officer, as well as the institutional biosafety board themselves, which they meet. Technically speaking, I guess you could say that they're on the team, but I mean they're kind of like this other body. So you're talking like maybe 6-7 people. And they all have sort of these different roles. So it's not like we're all sitting around, talking about how we're going to do a project. I have my thing, I hand it off, they hand theirs off, then they hand it back, so it's sort of like that. It's everybody already kind of knows what their role is in the team. It's not like we're sitting around spitballing stuff. So yeah.
I see. And right now, for Smartsheets, if somebody completes a task, is there like an email notification, or you have to check Smartsheets to know what steps that it's in?
It's not even that clever yet. Mostly it comes through as an email, like somebody will say FYI, or I'll be CC'd on the email to the collaborator, and I'll know by virtue of that email that I have to go into Smartsheets and mark it as done, or mark it as they're asking for these edits to the NDA, and so there's a ton of just, I don't even get to enjoy the what Smartsheet could be in that sense. I'm really just using it as my own diary at this point. And so, yeah, part of this will be, if I can make this really a smooth process, then I will be able to get more adoption for folks to go in, like they receive some kind of message from Smartsheet, and Smartsheet does this, can do this already. So I can assign tasks to people, and then they can receive an email, say, from Smartsheet by virtue of an automated workflow. And, in theory anyway, they could go in and say, done on this day, all's well, and then I'm totally hands off on that point. The adoption level has not been super strong. I haven't, like strongly advocated for it yet, but what I want to do is raise the capability of Smartsheet just a little bit more, especially now that I've done it a bunch for the last year, because I started about a year ago. Now that I've done it for a year, I kind of know, and I've honed the Smartsheet a bit, quite a bit. I've begun to really understand how to make it work well. And so part of my goal for 2021 is to get that adoption, to get people to start, responding specifically to Smartsheet, so I can just sit back and watch the data roll in instead of having to procure it myself.
Absolutely. Good questions. I'm hearing some of the details of the nuances. I think that stuff helps a lot for students to understand the problem set. And it sounds like does it do internal and external task assigning and editing capabilities? Can you have like your partners actually go into Smartsheets too and mark, I will be done on this deadline, right?
Yeah, and Smartsheet actually can do one better in that you can develop, and they've got this whole user interface that's already part of Smartsheet, and I do this for a couple of other sheets where it's a much kind of lighter lift, but you can develop these automated workflows where it will send an email, and in that email is a little kind of tiny form. And that form has X, Y, and Z fields that you specify that come out of that particular Smartsheet. And let's say it's what's the status? Is it complete? Is it in process? Is it not started? Is it canceled? Or what percentage is it done? If a percentage makes sense to put in there. When did it get done, or when did it get launched? So you can have these different fields, so that they don't have to like go digging around inside Smartsheet. They just have their particular piece of information right in front of them. And so, making really good use of some of these stuff that's already in Smartsheet is totally within scope of this project.
Okay.
And so we don't have to reinvent all the wheels here. We can utilize some of those tools, and that would make life, I think that would raise the adoption level for these external users. They just get an email, they fill in their thing, and they hit go. They don't have to log in. They don't have to go digging around in a sheet, all that.
So basically there's a form system, like an external form that can be built, for a variety of different reasons to input data in and to trigger certain things. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And then what you're creating almost is like an automated email, send that then sends out this, like, hey, subject line title, your NDA is ready to be signed. And then they go in and then they're click on the link and it goes to a form. They fill some stuff out. They click submit, and then boom, that step's done. Right. Mm-hmm. Type of scenario.
Yeah. Okay. And there's, so the idea would be that obviously in working with an intern, that person would have to come in under the LBNL umbrella as an affiliate. And so they would be bound by the non-disclosure agreements of Berkeley Lab and all that good junk. And they would also have their own, their own email, their own authentication. So they're in the system. And as such, they could then, just be utilizing these tools within the Smartsheet thing. And because they're an employee and they're essentially, not technically, but you know what I mean. And so I would say that because of that, they would be able to, test out different approaches using these automated workflows that are built in, figure out how it works, and then, part of that figuring out would be, going on YouTube and learning all about, some of this stuff that I haven't yet had time to figure out because, I've got 400 other tasks to take care of. So some of this is just like grunting it out and just, figuring out how to use Smartsheet a little better.
Yeah, the scope is very, so first of all, this is an exciting project because I like process optimization myself, and so I feel like I think some students will geek out on that as well, especially if they know that there's one tool that they need to really learn to integrate with and code on, which is Smartsheets. And then to know that it's also a very open platform, right, for input and output of data and the triggering of events. And then they're helping you and your division and your team and your partners and the incredible community that you're building, right? To make their lives easier, to advance their solutions in a more optimized way, so everyone can be happy and jolly and just be excited about what they're building, right? And then thus, the idea I think is to have a more aggregate kind of deployment of cool things happening in the world that helps to save humanity. And then I guess the vision is, you're then, jumping up and down, having fun, with all your partners, every day, and get to build partnerships with them, right? And build relationships with them so that all those tasks are to the side. And it's like a thing that they just go down and everyone's happy.
Right. And it's not that it's just offboarded onto somebody else who has to grunt out the tasks day in and day out. The tasks are grunting themselves. So that's my ultimate goal.
Beautiful. I think students can be very excited about this project. And I think word of advice for students from what I'm gathering right now is build capabilities and to know how to use Smartsheets, right? Learn, study that workflow that James has shared, for pretty much half this podcast, and and take a look at the resources he'll provide. And I think the number one thing I feel like would be a big win is having someone, a student, be able to, or even a group of students who know how to use Smartsheets, and know how to code on it, and are able to go and tackle priorities when they come in to work with James, right? So that you're essentially saying, cool, you all know what we're doing now, right? Here's project 1, 2, 3, go, have fun, knock it out. And then the next one, maybe 4, 5, 6 is after that, and so forth, right? I would say that that's probably how I would direct students' time. So James, this has been great. It's been helpful. I noticed the ones that go a little more than our typical hour is always really fascinating and interesting. And even though this is not like, first of all, your work is interesting, but the process is also fairly interesting in terms of a problem set. And you've also went really in depth. So thank you for your time for explaining all these things in detail. I guarantee you students are going to find this useful for building their project.
Okay, good. Excellent. Ada, are there any other questions that leap to mind from a student's point of view?
Not really, but I think this is a really cool project. And I think a lot of geeky / hyper organized students are going to love working on this.
Okay, awesome. Great. Well, thank you both so much.
Yeah, any last items that you can, we'll hold you back for a little bit after this, because I think we haven't done the resource onboard yet, but I'll tell you more about that later.
Okay.
But yeah, any last things you want to shout out to students, any particular tips or advice or last, parting thoughts, as they part on their journey for students?
Not really. I would just say that, it's really exciting to work at an organization that is mission driven in its in what it does. And, you know, the national laboratories are that. So we get to work on some really amazing problems. And I guess the other aspect of this is that the individuals that you would meet, obviously through Zoom at this point, are all really dedicated and incredibly bright. So it's just a, you know, it's a really amazing environment in which to execute this stuff. You know, there's a tremendous level of appreciation for diversity and inclusion at the labs. And so I think that too is a bit of a point of pride for all of us there who see it as an opportunity for a multitude of voices. You know, everybody is incredibly respectful and I think open-eyed, you know, at the Berkeley lab. So not only do you have really, really bright people, but by and large, you just have just a great open-minded group of folks. So there's collateral benefits to connecting at the lab.
And not to mention that Faith Dukes, who's the K-12 manager, you know, is leading up the charge on diversity and inclusion of bringing young talent into LBNL, into the labs, you know, so that there's a greater talent pool of those who are typically don't get doctorate degrees to be able to go in there, you know, and actually get experience as well. So you're also part of that as well. Yeah, and everything James just said. So thank you, James. Thanks for the conversation. And thank you, Ada, for co-hosting. And really enjoyed the conversation today. Ada, any last thoughts on your front?
Not really, but just thank you for sharing this project and offering it to students.
My pleasure.
Great.